Good afternoon. We interrupt our programming once again today to provide an update on the county's response to the TPC explosion investigation. Another press conference is being held in just a few moments on safety in mid-county, this time with the TPC and with some county officials today. This, of course, coming after yesterday's shelter-in-place and the voluntary evacuation order for people in Port Neches. Now, emergency personnel have lifted the shelter-in-place and the voluntary evacuation for folks in Port Neches, but there are still concerns as we look in right now. We have a gentleman at the podium. Let's listen in.
I want to welcome you to the status update on the TPC explosion and fire. I'm joined today by Mayor Glenn Johnson and Mayor Don Albanese from the cities of Port Neches and Nederland, respectively, and by State Representative Dave Phelan, who's here with us and has been a source of support during this event. These last 8 days have been certainly out of the ordinary for our community and something that we wish to never happen again. 2 days ago, I was in the incident command trailer at the site with Chief McDonald looking at video cameras on top of the trailer out at Tank 25, a spherical tank at the TPC facility, and we could see some vapors coming off a pressure relief valve at the top of the sphere. But at that time, we weren't getting any readings out in the community. When we had an aberration or a hit on one of the monitors, and the strike team was dispatched to look to try to validate the results, we were not finding any signs of chemicals within the community, even at action levels of 0.5 parts per million. So we felt comfortable that we're moving in the right direction, that life would get back to normal. But some things changed yesterday, which I'll discuss in just a moment. I want you to know at the outset that in coordination with the Unified Command that I'm working with TCEQ, the EPA, numerous governmental entities, the Texas General Land Office, Coast Guard, the Texas Forest Service, and others have been, along with Texas Division of Emergency Management within the Emergency Operations Center, and we've all been working together to bring about the successful conclusion of this, along with the plant operator and their independent contractors in toxicology and air monitoring. We remain focused on mitigating the effects of this event and making sure that we respond to the safety and security needs of the members of our community. So as I spoke a moment ago, our air monitoring day before yesterday and yesterday morning was looking great. Then about 5:30 yesterday evening, they started to have hits, and a shelter-in-place order was issued.
Sorry.
The hits were coming in an area approximately a half mile to the southwest of the site, and so we began to attempt to validate that. Strike teams were sent out, and then we spent some time in interpretation of the data trying to figure what that meant from a human health and safety standpoint. Speaking with EPA and TCEQ and CETH. And later that evening, after we had validated and interpreted it, voluntary evacuation order was issued, which we suspended both the shelter-in-place and the voluntary evacuation order earlier this morning. The reason is because this pressure relief valve on tank 25, this spherical tank, was leaking butadiene into the atmosphere, despite efforts to focus water flow upon it to knock down the vapors. During the night and early morning hours, TPC dispatched a 100-ton crane to the site. It took several hours. They had to put gravel out, put mats out. Couldn't cross over a pipe rack. Got the 100-ton crane with a man cage in it and lifted some people out there who were able to switch the valve and divert the flow from that pressure relief valve to a secondary pressure relief valve, and immediately air monitoring showed no detectable levels of butadiene in the atmosphere, a very minute amounts. There's a few things I want to, points that I want to make about these events, and the first is that the levels that were detected near the facility in the community during the course of this event are far below what might contribute to long-term health risk. And the concentrations of butadiene that are high enough to contribute to the increased risk of long-term health impacts have never been detected in the facility or out in the community. I'd also tell you that there are approximately 30 air monitoring stations across the area, both in mid and southern Jefferson County and in parts of Orange County. And I'd also mention I'm joined by the Orange County judge today, who's been part of our communication efforts on any potential impact within his county. And there has been no trace of any asbestos fibers found anywhere in the community. And the individuals that have been dispatched to people's home who thought that they have industrial debris that was blown by the blast into their yards, that's all been the subject of swipe tests. There's been no asbestos fibers detected in any of those swipe tests or in any of the air monitoring. So that's wonderful news. Zero asbestos. We now, I was in the Emergency Operations Center looking at the air monitoring data earlier. There were most of the tests around had no detectable butadiene. Some had like 0.02. And I want to mention that I've learned throughout my career in taking the depositions in my old life of practicing law that every substance, whether it's water or salt or Coca-Cola, in some dosage is toxic. There's also degrees of individual susceptibility. For instance, I love peanuts and I can eat them all day long, but there are people that are deathly allergic to peanuts. And I think that's the reason last night that we made the determination to do the voluntary evacuation order. But although I stayed in my home last night in Port Neches, there may be individuals who at lower concentrations might have watery eyes or scratchy throats or something of that nature. So we wanted to give those individuals an opportunity to bring themselves to another part of the county if they felt uncomfortable. I want you to know that part of the plan as we go forward is to completely take all of the product out of every tank within the facility. Not that it's posing a risk at this time. They continue to do monitoring of the site. They continue to use this special cameras that detect heat and the amounts of product within tanks and so forth. And we're not feeling as though there's any danger of any further fire events, but just to assure the safety of workers as they go into the plant to assess the damage and look at any construction that they need to do, and for the Chemical Safety Board, who will be doing their investigation in the cause and origin of the blast, to be able to work there with complete confidence that everyone is safe. TPC is beginning their attempts to evacuate the material from every one of those tanks out there and to put it on a barge if it can be done. If the equipment is sufficient and in good enough shape for them to be able to do that, they'll evacuate those tanks to barges and send them to other areas in Houston while this work is done out at the plant. They also have developed a phase plan in the event that some of the pipelines are impacted by the blast or some of the pumps don't function, to maybe use trucks. They've got a phased approach to this event and fallback positions in the event one doesn't work. So we're confident that they're moving in that direction. Right now they are adding what are called inhibitors to the tanks, which will assure that there are no reactions within the vessels while they're attempting to well, I'm not the only one, Adam, that's getting a phone call during the middle of this thing, but they're adding inhibitors to the vessels to assure that there'll be no reactions within the tanks while they're making the plans to move the product off-site. So that is where we are today. Right now, I want to turn the podium over to Mr. Jason Sanders, who's Vice President of Human Health and Safety at TPC, and let him make some comments about ongoing operations and their plans as we move forward.
Good afternoon. I'd like to introduce myself. As the judge said, my name is Jason Sanders. I work for TPC Group. I do want to correct you. I'm the environmental manager at the Houston site. So
You just got a raise.
yeah, believe me, I'll go back and tell them that. I would like to take the opportunity to see if any of you have any specific questions for us. I think what the judge has represented is our goal to remove all the materials from all of the tanks that are on site, to safely remove all those materials in whatever manner is most appropriate once we do a mechanical integrity assessment. And the goal is to do it as safely as possible. We have plans in place, and we are working those plans to try to appropriately contemplate any potential issues, and we are working very diligently to move towards that. So are there any specific?
Let's wait for the questions till after I give Adam.
Okay, all right, absolutely.
I also want to give an opportunity to speak to, I guess in keeping with my prior introductions, the director of the EPA in Washington, D.C. An individual that is assigned to our area to assist us in these operations and recovery, Mr. Adam Adams with the United States Environmental Protection Agency.
Thanks, Judge. Adam Adams, and I'm actually an on-scene coordinator for EPA Region 6. My job is to respond to emergencies for hazardous substances and oil spills in Region 6. We covered Texas and their surrounding states. We were activated early morning on November the 27th to come down and respond. We reached out to our federal partners, state, county, and local partners to get situational updates and engage this response. We've had support from Coast Guard, NOAA, TCEQ, GLO, county, local, huge list. I believe there's almost 24 different agencies that are providing support to this response, all with the same objective: to complete it safely and quickly, with the protection of the public and the health as the first priorities. So we're working together. Since we started, air monitoring in the community has been a top priority. We've been doing air monitoring continuously since, I believe it's like 7 a.m., 5 a.m. on the 27th. We have, I believe there's 22, 30, roughly around 24 teams that are on the ground between EPA, TCEQ, and TPC. And so when the wind shifts, we're watching the weather. So we also have perimeter air monitoring around the facility. If we get detections in a certain direction, we can send our teams and make sure that they're downwind. As the wind shifts, like it has over the last week, we move our teams in the field downwind. So we can, if we get a detection, then we relay that back to the unified command. We send a strike team to confirm those numbers. If it's just one instantaneous blip, then it's gone. Then that's not a sustained, so that's gone. If we do get a sustained, then that information is relayed to unified command, and that's shared with the local government to make the decision if a shelter in place or an evacuation is appropriate for that community. So over the last, since we started this, we've had tens of thousands of readings in the community. We've had less than 1,000 detections that were sustained in the community, like much less than that. I believe, and of the average of all the detections is still like 1.2 parts per million. So that's a really good number. That's a really low number. In the last 24 hours, the numbers are roughly the same. It mirrors. So yesterday, when we started, as the wind was shifting, first it was blowing to the southeast, and then it started coming around. We started getting some hits over by the fire department. So we sent our other teams, double checking, confirming those numbers. We started getting sustained numbers. So we all were engaged, everybody on unified command. We made sure that everybody was part of the decision-making process. We communicated that to the local authorities, to the judge and his team, and it was determined that a shelter in place was the appropriate action. Later, as the wind continues to shift, the judge made the call to do the voluntary evacuation. Yesterday, kind of just out of an abundance of caution, so I'm not a human health expert. I do emergency response. We clean this stuff up. So out of an abundance of caution, I engaged the ATSDR. It's the Agency for Toxic Substance Agency, and I wrote it down. It's longer than EPA. The Agency for Toxic, say it again?
Disease Registry.
Disease Registry. These are the human health safety guys, experts. And so they have a 5-member team that came down to support this emergency response. Not all of them are here, but they're already engaged reviewing the data, and they're going to communicate their concerns to us. They also reach out to the state health authorities, Texas Department of State Health Services. And so they communicate and make sure that the state is engaged in looking at the data. And then they're also talking to the local health authorities. And so they provide medical monitoring guidelines to the local health authority in the event there's an influx. It's not expected, but they prepare for it just in case. So at the federal, state, and local health authority level, they are engaged on this response and part of this unified command. If you have physical ailments or something, naturally you should go see your doctor or go to the emergency room or something. If you have concerns or questions about potential exposures or something, you can call the poison control number. It's 1-800-222-1222. If you want to know what's going on at the incident, EPA has a website. It's response.epa.gov/ and then with no spaces, South, the number 4, Group Fire. If you want to see, the TCQ also has a website, and then also the portnaturesresponse.com. That's where everything is. I haven't been on that one. I've been on the EPA one. But we're sharing our data within Unified Command, and we're making strategic decisions based on all the data we see continuously throughout the 24-hour period every day. We appreciate the support of our federal, state, county, and local responders and Unified Command, and we appreciate the work that's being done. Thank you.
All right, we also have several PhD toxicologists and industrial hygienists here behind me that will be available to answer any questions you might have. So we'll open it up for questions and I would mention just a little correction. I made the decision in concert with City of Port Neches last night on the voluntary evacuation order. But want to open it up for any questions y'all might have to any of the individuals that have spoken or anybody else or any of our toxicologists.
Let's start with local outlets, please.
Yes, I have a question for Mr. Adam. I know you spoke I know you all spoke about the materials that are being moved from those tanks. What exactly are all of those materials that are being moved, and are for the people in that area, are they at risk for any other type of leaks or any other type of safety concerns at this point?
So I think that's a two-part question. So the contents, Jason would respond to that. As far as any potential impact to the community, we have perimeter air monitoring, and so if anything comes across the perimeter line, we double check those numbers and notify the local government. Yes, sir. Jason.
So to address any products or materials that might be in the tanks, The majority of the groupings of products and materials are going to be butadiene, crude butadiene, and raffinate. Those will be the majority of the products that would be moved. In order to make sure we don't have any leaks or any other releases, what we would do is an initial and mechanical integrity assessment to make sure that all the pipes, valves, flanges, the tanks themselves, that there are no breaches in any of those equipment, to ensure that they are properly working and safely working. And then we would come up with a plan in order to move those products, preferably across our docks, or if we had to, we would transfer them to tanker trucks or something of that nature in order to remove them from the site, so you mitigate the potential for an additional release.
Jason, how long will that process take, moving this material? What kind of time frame will that take?
Well, so the Port Neches facility has currently about 102 tanks or spheres at the site. If I remember correctly, 88 of them actually have product or material in them. So you can imagine that that's the process that we need to do a mechanical integrity assessment for each and every one of those storage tanks. We need to be able to look, because they all have pipes and lines and pumps and valves associated with them. So we would need to make sure that each and every piece of equipment can be operated safely, and if it is damaged, then what's an alternative option to get that product out of that tank. So each and every one of the tanks or spheres may present a different challenge. And so we would need to essentially create a plan for each and every one of those vessels.
So talking maybe weeks?
Weeks at least. Yes, sir.
For people living in mid-county, are there any safety concerns using appliances like ACs, heaters, even water? Is there any safety at this time concerns with people using that in their homes right now in the county?
No, so since we were able to secure the leaking release valve on the top of tank 25, within minutes, the air quality, the benzene levels, butadiene levels went significantly lower. So since the incident, or since the valve was closed at about 9:44 a.m. this morning, the highest reading that we have seen is 0.23 ppm. So it's been a significant reduction in what's been in the atmosphere, and there have been no levels that would require any action in any of the neighborhoods.
What level is considered a dangerous level, something that can cause human hazard of butadiene or any other chemicals that you guys are handling right now?
Okay, so I'll let a toxicologist answer that. Yeah, answer that question.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Dr. Angie Perez, and I'm a senior toxicologist with CTEH. And to answer your question, we know that the EPA AEGL, that's acute emergency guidance levels, they have a level 1 value of 670 ppm, and that's based on irritant effects. So it's not based on long-term irreversible health effects. It's just based on irritant effects, such as watering eyes, scratchy throat, some of the things we've already talked about. So that's one of the guidance values that we were relying upon.
Did you say 670?
670 ppm. You have to remember that this chemical, butadiene, has a very low odor threshold, so you can smell it at levels that are not of human health concern. It's up when we get into the hundreds of ppm level, that's when you start to see adverse effects.
What kind of levels are there as far as low buildup? We've had these low levels, but being in there a week, 2 weeks, at what point is that a danger?
In the community, you mean?
Yes.
Okay, so typically, and our data people can speak to this too, my colleagues, fellow toxicologists, the levels in the community have been either non-detect or very low, well below our screening levels. And a point of that is that our screening levels were developed and approved, reviewed by every agency here and approved by this unified command. And so we've been monitoring those screening levels and monitoring the results from our community monitoring, and most have been below, as Adam mentioned earlier.
Is there a reason why people in the community would be experiencing headaches, sore throats, things like that, if it's not rating at a detectable
Yes,
level?
yes, there is. And in fact, our partners from the ATSDR, who will be here this evening, can probably speak to this again tomorrow at the press release. But ATSDR and others have put out numerous documents talking about sensory irritation. That's what it's called, sensory irritation. And essentially, you can get a headache just based on the odor itself, not based on any kind of toxicity response. So think about it in terms of, you don't like perfume. My mom, she hates perfume. She gets headaches at the slightest whiff of perfume. It doesn't mean she's having a toxic response to perfume. So butadiene is one of those chemicals where it's a nuisance odor, but it was short term. That's the thing. Back to the incident last night where we had readings in the community in Port Neches, those levels were of nuisance odor level. We could smell them, but they did not pose a long-term human health concern.
For Jason. For those, I know yesterday was a voluntary evacuation. For those families who may have made the decision to go ahead and get out of town, I was out there, that odor was strong. And I can only imagine for people with breached homes, broken windows, broken doors, what they were going through, especially people with families. Those people who decided to evacuate, will they be reimbursed for hotels, gas and costs, anything like that?
So what I would reiterate that we have said throughout this incident is if you call the community hotline, give them your information, and you will be contacted back. And that number is, I believe...
866-601-5880.
You've got it.
I was at a town hall meeting yesterday, and I've talked to multiple people, frustrated residents, saying that they've been calling. They said they were told 24 hours to get a response. It's been 48, 72, 5, 6 days now, and they still haven't gotten a response.
Okay.
Can we follow up on that one? I'll follow up with you on that. Anybody else local have any questions?
If we're on resident frustration, we've heard from many residents that say, they've even said they're losing trust in officials. They think it's been a reactionary response. We heard that we knew about the leaks long before last night when there was an issue. If there are, even at low levels, the smell is a nuisance, it gives people headaches, why aren't residents being made aware ahead of time there could be an issue so they can have the information to arm themselves?
We've made them aware. We put it out on Port Neches Response. We put it out on social media. We've made them aware of the EPA and TCEQ tracking, monitoring data that's available for their review. And, they had their lives upended last week because of simply when the explosion occurred. We don't take it lightly at upending them again. And we certainly don't want to put human health or the environment at risk. But we're not going to run around willy-nilly making decisions on the drop of a hat without consulting with each other and attempting to determine what's best for our respective communities. And I'm not going to make the decision in a vacuum except as a last resort. I'm always going to consult with my mayors.
Judge, as this continues to go on, is there a message for residents? Should they be prepared for maybe another order in the future? Should another leak happen? What would your message be for residents right now as you guys continue to get the public release?
I'm guardedly confident and certainly hopeful that as we move forward and as all these cameras have been deployed in the last couple of days that have the capability of catching leaks, that that we're not going to have any more, or that those are going to be able to be fixed relatively quickly. And that's the reason for the fence line monitoring, to assure that they know if there is an upset so that they can address it. And as the fallen infrastructure on the property as a result of the explosion and the fire begins to cool and people can move around more safely, as soon as the chief out there has determined that they can enter safely, then that will be done. And I know that they'll use all speed to try to get those done as quickly as they can do it without impacting human health and safety or the safety of their workers.
State Representative Phelan, I got a quick question for you. On a state level, what kind of resources can the state provide? Is the state ready to step in and help out?
Well, the state has been providing, I think, quite a bit of resources and always willing and able to do whatever we can. I've had various conversations with Toby Baker at the TCEQ about this incident and other incidents that have happened here in Texas over the last year or 2 years, and has spoken to the governor's office as well about it. And what we do, we can't undo what has been done, but we can certainly be prepared as we go forward from a state policy standpoint, no doubt. But I do think that between TCEQ and the GLO and several other state agencies, I think the response across the board, both locally and federally, has been exceptional.
All right, last local question right here.
Yes, for Judge Bennett. I know that the plant has sent out people monitoring there. I know the TCEQ has been out monitoring there. Has there been any county resources out or used during this process?
No.
Or any kind of thing?
No, we don't have that expertise within our 900 employees. We employ engineers, but they're not industrial hygienists, toxicologists, or epidemiologists. They're civil engineers who primarily work on roads and bridges.
Well, after today's events, any thoughts of maybe adding a few in those perspectives?
No, we're doing this under the National Incident Management System and the Incident Command and Control Structure, and we have our Sabine Nature's Chief, which is the Mutual Aid Society. The reason we do that is so that we can draw on the resources of others. The state, through TCEQ, provides those services. The federal government, through the EPA, provides those services. And I don't want to add money to our tax rate to fund something that we can do through mutual aid.
All right, we're going to open it up. Erwin?
This is for TPC. Excuse me. At a news conference about an hour ago, Manuel Ehrlich, who's a board member of the CSB, said this explosion was the result of a fundamental failure in the system. Do you accept that there was some failure on TPC's part, and have you any preliminary identification of what that failure was?
So I think that what TPC wants to do is have great faith in the CSB process. I think that we are not trying to assume any ideas about what the cause was. I think that the CSB is there to thoroughly investigate what happened, and I think that we need to trust their process and allow that to follow through their processes, because I think they can do a fantastic job at finding the root cause.
I have a question about testing, air quality testing. We've been monitoring the TCEQ testing and have been in communication with them. They've told us that if there's a VOC level that's been coming back as a 0 and not a specific butadiene reading,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes there's a number under butadiene and it'll show 0 on VOC. Can you explain what that discrepancy is for because people, as the judge noted, has been put out for the public consumption to show that the air is clean, but the readings are confusing.
Okay.
So in that particular situation, it's because the butadiene sensors are more sensitive than the VOCs in that specific piece of equipment. So that's one of the main reasons. So when we get detections, instantaneous or sustained from one ground team that's monitoring, we send out another strike team to double check and confirm those numbers. That way we have consistent equipment and we're confirming that information before we send it up and it's overreactive or underreactive. We want to confirm those numbers to be most protected for the public health.
I can add to that.
Oh, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Sean Weineck. I'm a board-certified toxicologist with CTH. So in answer to your question, when you look at volatile organic compounds, it looks as a broad suite of the entire total volatiles that could be in air. So if we're getting detects by total volatile organic compounds, it triggers our action plan to then do specific testing, use chemical-specific equipment for 1,3-butadiene. So the VOCs is kind of a general action level, but then it allows us to do a next tier where we do chemical-specific testing for 1,3-butadiene. So this is all real-time air monitoring. In addition to real-time air monitoring, we're also conducting analytical air sampling. So these are canisters that are throughout the community. We have 30 analytical air sampling stations. These collect air continuously over a 24-hour period. Those samples are collected by our personnel. They're then sent to a third-party accredited laboratory. They're analyzed then for total volatile organics via US EPA method. We get those results back and we're able to analyze what's in the air continuously. Based on the results that we've seen to date that we've collected, the levels of 1,3-butadiene have actually been in the part per billion range. While we get detects on our handheld instrument, many of those detects have been instantaneous and not sustained. So ultimately, we have to look at the collective body of both the real-time data that we collect and the analytical air sampling data.
And just to clarify those numbers, I believe you and Platt said it earlier. Can you tell us again that number? You said was been the highest reading so far since this morning. I think you said 0.23 parts per million, but I want to clarify that number.
That is correct. 0.23 parts per million.
Okay. And Judge, is there a reason that some of the most vulnerable, the hospitals and nursing homes, et cetera, were not a part of that voluntary evacuation? Was just a matter of logistics and probably too hard to get folks, evacuated?
We don't have any hospitals or nursing homes in Port Neches.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Adams, there have been multiple incidents this year, explosions that have greatly affected people. Are we just seeing more of these this year? Is it just a bad luck year, or is this a growing problem in the chemical industry?
I can't really speak to that. Basically, when there's an incident, the OSC gets activated to come out and respond. So I can't talk about, other projects and or trends.
I went over to the Chemical Safety Board's press opportunity a little bit earlier and heard that question asked, and I know that there were a couple of events over in the Houston area, but I want to speak to Jefferson County in particular. When I was a little boy growing up in Port Arthur, there were explosions that happened pretty frequently. Air quality was bad, water quality was bad. Over the years and through the 90s and early 2000s, we saw pollution control equipment installed after the 91 Prop 2, I believe it was, that allowed for tax exemptions for pollution control equipment. The quality of our air has improved dramatically over these last 25 years. We have cleaner air than Houston and Austin and the Woodlands and most of the other areas of Texas. Our water quality is fantastic. You couldn't catch a fish in there in a coastal waterway when I was a little boy, and if you did, you wouldn't have wanted to eat it. Some of the best fishing spots in the county now are right off Texaco Island, outside Valero and Motiva refineries. We rarely have explosions over here. We used to, when I first started practicing law, explosions were happening every other month. And people were hurt every other month. We don't get people hurt or killed every several years now. And thank the good Lord above, we didn't have anybody killed in this incident. But I don't want this being characterized as something that's a regular occurrence, because it's not. It's a very rare occurrence. And plant safety and human health and safety have become number one over the last 25 years, where it was just an afterthought when I was growing up. So I think it's a mischaracterization to try to make that point.
Any more questions at this time?
I have a question for Mr. Sanders. So just so we're clear, was...
Who are you talking to?
Mr. Sanders. Just so we're clear, the option to transport the tanks to Houston, was that just one of the considered options, or will that, what goes forward?
So we wouldn't be transporting the tanks to Houston. We'd be transporting the materials that are stored in all the tanks. So we're exploring any and all options to send the materials to either our Houston facility or our Lake Charles terminal or any other terminals that we could possibly find the storage capabilities in order to, again, de-inventory the entire site safely and in a time frame that makes sense in order to minimize any potential for any other releases or incidents.
Does that mean the pipeline structures at the plant have been compromised?
We haven't been able to get into the entire facility until just yesterday. So we still have a lot of time to be able to properly perform the right mechanical integrity inspections. And again, we talk about we need to look at every pump in the plant, every pipe, every pipeline, every tank, every exchanger, every imaginable piece of equipment in the facility needs to be assessed before we are willing to move product or make any decisions or plans to move products, just to ensure that we are absolutely making sure nothing else happens.
Okay, we'll take one more here.
For Mr. Adams, I know we've spoken a lot and given a lot of information on what hasn't been detected in the air, but throughout this whole process, the last 7 to 8 days, what all chemicals have been detected from you all?
Sure. So the primary constituent that we're looking for is the butadiene, because that's the primary constituent in most of the material that's on site. And then also we're looking at the VOCs.
So there's no clear readings on the different types of chemicals that you all are seeing, or are you only looking for a handful?
That's the primary, those are the driving ones. Those are kind of the worst case ones. So if we're protected for butadiene, then we're protected for other potential constituents.
I just want to be really clear, Mr. Sanders. I thought you guys had established a place where you guys are transporting all these materials to, but now you just say you're looking to the, you're checking out the whole facility to make sure you can safely transport these things. Where are you putting these materials in the meantime that are going to be transported so that they won't?
So they will remain in the current either spheres or tanks that they are in. Right now, we are doing surveys multiple times a day with drones, looking at every piece of equipment that we possibly can to make sure that there's been no changes in the status of those pieces of equipment from day to day or from morning to evening. We are taking temperature readings on every sphere and tank multiple times a day. We are looking and using infrared cameras on every piece of equipment in the site, and we're also using thermal imaging. So we're taking full advantage of any and all technology available to us to maintain and understand the status of the materials within the tanks and spheres to ensure that nothing is happening. And so that's why it takes a little while to plan to where we're going to move each and every contents.
So that process could take weeks, correct?
Absolutely, it could take many, many weeks.
Mr. Sanders, just to be clear, you're not disputing the initial cause released earlier today by the CSB? You're not disputing what they said, are you?
I was not able to be at that press conference, so I don't know what was stated there. So I cannot comment on that.
All right, thank you guys. We appreciate you coming out for this availability.
I got something to say.
You do? Okay. There.
The judge, if you don't mind. I had told the judge I didn't need to talk, but I do. My name is Glenn Johnson. I'm the mayor of Port Neches. And I'm going to tell you something. I'm not talking to any of the other citizens. I'm talking to the citizens of Port Neches. I got a city manager, a fire chief, a police chief, a public works director that have been working their butts off for the last 8 days trying to keep the citizens of Port Neches safe. We're not making decisions on what's going to get us reelected. We're making decisions on what keeps the citizens safe. The judge mentioned earlier, we have websites that have official information on those websites. Citizens of Port Neches, go to the websites. I am absolutely amazed at how many geniuses are on, what is it, YouTube or whatever that social media thing is. People that have no idea of what's going on, but they're experts. They have more knowledge than the EPA, more knowledge than the TCEQ, more knowledge than these doctors over here about what's going on out there. And people are reading this stuff and believing it. Come on. I don't do that, but my wife reads it to me until I get angry like I am now, and then she stops reading it to me. Stop going to social media to get your information. Go to the Port Neches Response website. Is that it, Andre?
That's what they've set up.
Okay, well, yeah. Port Neches Response, and others to get your official information. Quit using Facebook. Because, listen, people, they don't know what they're talking about. These people are putting out their information where it needs to be put out, not on Facebook, and I'm tired.
And next we'll hear from someone who has an opinion.
It just makes you angry.
I'd like to say something.
Yes, Mayor.
I'm Don Albanese. I'm the mayor of Nederland. I'm not going to fuss like Mr. Johnson did, but I just want to commend some people. When you have an event of this magnitude, people, this was large. And we're only getting about 3 people hurt to where, not seriously, but that means somebody was doing their job and doing it right. So I want to commend the TCP, the people out there, the firefighters, all the first responders for what they did. The Port Neches, the Nederland, the Groves Police Department, fire departments was involved, and they did a heck of a job. And everything come out, as with an event this big, I think everything come out fairly well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, so with that, we'll conclude. Thank you all again for being here. Channel 12 will follow up.
Couldn't agree more.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That was well said. I'm glad that you put that out.
All right, good afternoon, friends. We appreciate your being with us. We learned many things this afternoon at this press conference related to the TPC blast. It seems as though an effort at reassurance was the theme of this afternoon's conversations involving the Jefferson County Judge Jeff Brannick and several officials with several different agencies. 12 News team coverage at the scene has illuminated a lot. We have both Tyler Segman and Jordan Foster reporting this afternoon, and we learned quite a bit. Among those things we learned that only low levels of 1,3-butadiene have been detected in the area, that testing started actually fairly early, and we learned about why there may be some irritation in some folks as opposed to toxicity. To elaborate on point one, this matter of the low levels detected, the county judge, Jeff Brannick, saying those levels far below what we could see in terms of a long-term health risk, that 30 monitoring stations have been at play in the area to check that air, and that no trace of asbestos fibers have been located during that testing. All this starting about 5:30 yesterday, when there were concerns about the air quality centered on a site about a half mile to the southwest of the site of the TPC plant. And subsequent to that, it was learned that tank 25 seemingly was the point of trouble, that a pressure release valve needed to be closed there. A manned cage dropped into the area, a 100-ton crane used to bring personnel into that location and then close off that valve, seemingly giving us a little bit of illumination on whether it was electronic closing of the valves that could take place or whether it had to be done specifically by personnel. But again, no detectable levels of serious problems regarding butadiene in that location. Jason Sanders also speaking with the TPC Group, Alan Adams with the EPA. We learned that the testing started about 5 a.m. on November 27th. So see, folks, that would be just hours after the blast early that Wednesday morning, last Wednesday morning. We also learned from toxicologists about some of the levels that would be a serious concern, that being 670 parts per million. We haven't had near quite that. And Dr. Angie Perez, the toxicologist, saying it would take actually several hundred parts per million to cause serious issues. Headaches, maybe from the odor itself, not a toxicity. We learned a lot about this. 12 News will keep you covered throughout the evening's newscast as far as a summary of this information. For now, we'll send you back to regular programming. Have a good afternoon.